Well, major reversal by the White House today. Finally, after all these couple months, feels like many months of banging their heads against the wall and trying to convince people, that face masks are dangerous and that you shouldn't wear one unless you're a trained medical professional because you don't know how to put it on. And in fact, wearing a face mask, increases your odds of getting the virus. So don't do that. Don't protect yourself. Just go and breathe the open air. And as Jim, Mr. Mediocre, likes to say, let that Chinese man spit in your mouth. That's basically been the White House's policy now, ever since they started talking about the Wu flu at all. And this has had profound negative impacts on American society and our chances of dealing with this virus well. Obviously, these societies in the Far East, where everyone already, kind of wore a mask, to where that kind of was that was culturally acceptable. It was something that people commonly did. They seem to have so far at least fared a little better. In Japan and South Korea, they have had much smaller outbreaks. And again, there's many factors that could contribute to that, but I think that one significant one is the face mask thing. I mean, it's undeniable that a face mask helps you, and so this lie that's been perpetuated by the governments of mostly the U.S., but also the rest of the world, the World Health Organization, for one. They have a lot of blood on their hands for what they've done in misinforming people. And why is it that they did that? Or were they that stupid? Is the Surgeon General of the United States really dumb enough to think that wearing a face mask will increase your odds of getting sick? Of course not. The reason why the Surgeon General of the United States had been discouraging people from buying face masks, and the reason why all the lemmings were lapping that up, the reason why the midwits, the folks who are not necessarily low IQ but certainly far from high IQ, why those folks, the pseudo-intellectuals, latched onto this idea. And sadly, I even saw people like Tim Pool, who are usually pretty good on stuff, but he was going, at the time, oh my gosh, people, stop buying face masks. It's not going to help you. You're going to hurt yourself. Absolutely brain dead. The reason why the propagandists like the U.S. Surgeon General were pushing this is because the governments of the world, particularly the United States, did not have a sufficient stockpile of face masks. They did not have enough personal protection equipment, as we've been hearing about for weeks, in order to service all the hospital staff and all the people who've been dealing with this. So they were hoping that if they convinced the public that face masks are useless, well, then the government could go out and scoop up all those face masks and buy them. Or in some cases, like this poor man in Brooklyn who owned a lot of face masks and was selling them to people who wanted them. You have them seized by the government and taken out of public circulation. Now, of course, the official justification, they called it a public service, seizing all these masks from this guy, because they said, oh, well, he's price gouging. Right about now, I'm sure there's a lot of people in America who would pay, $5-10 for a face mask just because you can't find them anywhere. So if there was someone who had enough foresight, if there was an investor, a speculator who went out and bought a bunch of face masks, knowing that, hey, in a couple months people are going to want these. And then people now are voluntarily going to him and buying these masks, maybe in packs of 3 or whatever, at an incredibly inflated price over what they used to be. But, right now they're quite scarce, so the price has gone up. That man's doing a great service to society because he's providing a way of rationally allocating these scarce resources. Now, instead, his entire investment has been wasted now, and he's probably not doing too well financially because the government of New York City, or of the state of New York, has broken into his house and stolen all of his property and hauled off those masks and taken them out of public circulation so that ordinary people can't use them. Those masks are now going to the government because, like I said, the governments did not have nearly enough face masks for themselves. They were too dumb. While this was all going on in China, they didn't think, maybe we should stock up. Maybe we should we should contract with companies that can make face masks to try and start setting up assembly lines right now so that we can start pumping these things out, because we know we're going to need millions and millions and millions of these things every week or every month. Maybe they would have thought, if they had any foresight at all, back in January, like this guy in Brooklyn, for example, who went out and bought a bunch of face masks, maybe if they had been as insightful as that guy, they would have gone out to the MyPillow guy, who's now making, PPE, and gone to him and said, hey, Mike Lindell, owner and inventor of MyPillow, could you possibly make some N95 face masks for us? And Mike Lindell, if they sat him down and explained the situation to him that, hey, there's going to be this really bad, virus that could spread to the United States and kill millions of people, he would have said, oh, hell yeah, I'd love to help my country. He would have probably said the same thing that he's been saying this week. And who knows how many other Mike Lindells are out there in the country who would have at the time, willingly retooled, or not even retooled, but just, retuned. Because again, N95 face masks are, I think that's something that a normal textile operation could produce. Textiles, very, I don't want to say primitive industry, but it's the most basic form of industrial production. That is, where the Industrial Revolution got started was in the textile industry. So masks, should not be as scarce as they are right now. But lo and behold, after all this time, after all this trying to finagle and play with the market by trying to suppress the demand for face masks, by putting out false information, the government comes out and says, yeah, you should probably wear a face mask. And who knows, pretty soon they're probably going to say you can't leave your house without a face mask. So it's a good thing I have some. But the vast majority of Americans, unless you're in some business to where you happen to have some, if you are, someone who works in drywall or, some kind of construction or in woodworking, I guess, you probably don't have these things, just laying around. But had you, been given, a little bit of an inclination that these things, were necessary and that they would help you, not only would the people, those of us who have them, have been wearing them this whole time, but, there would have been a drive on the part of, people who don't have them to rush out and try and go get them. Now you could say, well, there's not nearly enough masks for them, so they would have sold out immediately. And that's true, but again, had that happened, that would have just been all the more reason to spur the production of these by any company that can produce them, because again, these are not super complicated. These are not ventilators. These are not an incredibly complicated piece of medical machinery. They are relatively simple. I mean, hell, in World War II, you had companies all across America making guns and tanks and airplanes and all sorts of other things, and they started up pretty quick. After Pearl Harbor. You're telling me that if, Trump hadn't treated this outbreak in Wuhan like Pearl Harbor, that we couldn't have had, a massive production of face masks in this country, a massive, machine churning these things out by this point in the crisis? Sure, there would have been an initial run on face masks, but pretty soon we would have been able to meet that demand and start getting them to people. And of course, had we done that, it would have been much harder for this whole virus to spread around, because, when you're wearing a mask, even if you do get sick, you're not going to get as sick, because, you wouldn't have ingested as much of the virus if the mask does anything to try and, on the margins, reduce your exposure. And so you would have effectively, lowered the R naught on this and made it much harder for this thing to spread around. And this belated attempt at doing so now by the administration is not going to have nearly the effect that that it would have had a couple months ago. So I guess I could say, at least they're taking the right stance now. But again, this is just too little, too late. So with that said, if you gain anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day, and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.